Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Leading with Clarity and Uncertainty. My name is Jan Stevens, and I will serve as one of your hosts for today's webinar. I hope most of you are comfortable with Zoom, but if you have any technical questions, I have the chat active only to the panelists so that you can communicate with me if you have any difficulties with your technical Zoom. If you have any content questions during today's webinar, please post them in the Q&A section of your control panel. As the questions are asked, anyone can upvote a question to let us know that more than one person has the same question. Randy Onji will be monitoring the questions throughout the webinar, and there will be time to answer as many as we can at the end. If we do not get to your question during today's webinar, we will do our best to get back to you with an answer via email. You will receive an email tomorrow with a link to today's recording if you would like to listen again or share it with colleagues. We will also include a link to a feedback survey and would very much appreciate if you would return that. Now to introduce our presenters, Jenny Catron and Nathan Art. Jenny is a leadership coach, author, and speaker. As founder and CEO of the Foresight Group, she consults organizations on leadership, team culture, and organizational health. Jenny is also the author of several books, including Clout, Discover and Unleash Your God-Given Influence, and The 4 Dimensions of Extraordinary Leadership. Nathan is the principal and founder of Ministry Solutions. In the past 8 years, under Nathan's leadership, Ministry Solutions has funded and managed over $700 million in church projects across the country. Nathan has also personally been a part of advising and consulting with some of the largest and fastest growing churches in America. Nathan brings a strong background in real estate and finance. He is also considered one of the leading experts on how this new age of digital disruption will impact what church will look like coming out of the COVID-19 season. Now, I'll turn it over to Nathan and Jenny.
Thank you,
Well,
Jan.
welcome. Yeah, thank you, Jan. Thank you, Randy, for helping facilitate everything today. And we're super excited that y'all have joined us. I think all of us have been over the last couple of months, responding and reacting to all of the challenges that this season has presented. And we want to welcome you to this webinar, which we entitled Leading with Clarity in Uncertainty, because I think if anything's certain, we know that things are a bit uncertain right now. But what Nathan and I both have a passion for is really helping you think through those next steps and try to make the strategic decisions around staffing, finance, budgeting, and positioning yourself well for strategic growth opportunities that are ahead. And so I'm excited for us to dive into the conversation today. Nathan has become a really great friend and just somebody who's incredibly wise, especially when we're talking about finance and real estate and how to think and plan as a leader in that capacity. And having served myself as an executive pastor for over 12 years, I wish I'd known Nathan better when I was in that seat. But so Nathan, let's just jump right into this. And I know that we have had some conversations and a lot of us are saying, how is this similar or different from 2008? I think that's a question that you're getting a lot. And so I think that'd be a great jumping off point to say, how is what we're experiencing now different from 2008 and what we experienced then?
Yes, and I think the question kind of behind that question is what can we expect to be different, right? And so, when you think back to all the financial crises that have happened in this country, almost every single one of them had to do with other people's money. So, we had Black Friday and the crash of the stock market being over leveraged. We had the Great Depression. We had the savings and loan crisis of the early 90s. We had the Great Recession of 2008. Every single one of those really had to do with the leverage of other people's money. And what's interesting, when you look at this, there are 4 major characteristics that would define or create a recession. The first is you have a really big fall off in commodities, which we've had. Oil and gas had nothing to do with COVID, took a huge tank, city of Houston's reeling. And then you have a sudden or unexpected event, which is COVID. You see some instability somewhat in the currency market, which they've been talking about really for a couple a couple of years. And then debt, right? Like the big topic. And one of the surprising things that's come out of this is people go, wow, there's a lot of debt out there. And so you look at those four things and it scares you because you think, wow, this has all the makings of having to repeat what's happened before. The difference is this: over leverage really was the one of the main causes of the things that happened to our economy. Banks had a bunch of junk bonds, and attached to those junk bonds, if you guys remember the credit default swaps and all the other things, all the other financial instruments that were attached to the asset-backed securities market. And there were just 100 side bets on top of side bets. And so when one card fell, the entire house of cards fell.
Right.
And we're just not in that situation. Like the debt that's out right now is because interest rates have been crazy low, and it's mostly A-rated or even AAA rated corporate debt, big corporations basically making the decision to say, hey, I can borrow money at 3 to 4%. Why would I spend my cash when I can use my cash to get a rate of return of 15 to 20%? So the capital markets are actually really secure. The only two things right now that are, you hear about unemployment, which I can touch on in a second.
Right.
The two biggest things that are really getting hit right now are office and retail. And, candidly, one thing I want to kind of lead with is, and I think this is kind of setting up on my side, what I want people to understand in the webinar here is COVID actually hasn't changed anything. What it's really done is it's just accelerated a lot of things that were already happening.
That's true.
And, the office market was in for a major correction. And retail, people were wondering how in the world brick and mortar was surviving in the digital age. And now it's not. And that was a 2 to 3 year transition that's now become a 2 to 3 month transition. And you see Neiman Marcus and J. Crew and Payless and all these different retailers that are just financially struggling. That was coming because people weren't adapting to the market. But the good news is I don't have a crystal ball. I wish I did. But one of the things that is going to happen kind of coming into this fall is there's going to be a lot of opportunity for organizations that have strong financial positions. And Jenna, you and I talk about this all the time, but most of the churches that we're working with, we are seeing a decline in expenses, but at least a consistency or even an increase in revenue.
Right.
And so come this fall, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities, and we'll talk about this later, but a lot of opportunities for churches to take advantage of some of the things that are happening in the market right now.
Yeah, that's good. Speak a bit about, buildings and real estate. You've mentioned that a little bit, but that's going to likely change coming out of COVID. What do you see, and what does that mean for us as church leaders?
Yeah, again, and I really believe this, that COVID hasn't changed a lot of things. And this isn't a knock on church world, but sometimes when you look at trends, the church seems to be 10 to 15 years behind what the market's doing. What we were seeing already, and we've worked with a lot of churches on helping them get to the point where we're seeing a larger number of smaller campuses.
Right.
And the reason for that is that it's easier to find existing buildings when you have smaller square footage and parking requirements. It allows you to actually be in the communities you're serving versus having to move outside. You're not having to only have the option of land development. You can actually use existing churches or buildings. And so most of the churches that we're working with, especially those that are on that fastest growing list, are doing a campus a year. Right. And that's already been the trend. The other thing that we're seeing, though, is that, and I know this is a big thought, and I probably need to preface it really well, but if you think about it, church and higher education are two of the only institutions in the country where we tell people where they have to be and what time they have to be there. Yeah. In order to be a consumer, which is the mindset, and I know that's a dangerous word, but
right.
But yeah, but that's the mentality, right? If I want to watch a movie, I can download it at any time. I literally, that's what my kids are doing right now. They want to watch a movie. I hit a button, and that's what they're doing so that they're not interrupting our webinar today.
Right.
I can read a book. I mean, I can. You and I, you're in Wisconsin. I'm in Atlanta. You and I can jump on a Zoom call and connect.
Yep.
And people are getting more and more accustomed to that idea of being able to access something without being told when and where to be there.
Yeah.
And so you're really seeing a lot of that right now where people are engaging. We're reaching people we didn't reach before through this digital presence, which I do want to dive into a little bit more. That being said, I think the future of church buildings is yes. I think we're going to see a larger number of smaller campuses. But the other thing is, and this is something we've been working on for several years now that I'm passionate about, which is the idea of church buildings being as relevant as they are reverent. And what I mean by that is where spirituality and practicality kind of meet, to me, is relevance, right? So what consumers are looking for, what people are looking for in the spiritual experience, like right in the middle of that really is the word relevance. And I believe the gospel is both a spiritual but also a physical plan of redemption. And we have had a lot of success recently in the past couple of years with churches creating. You think about how we spend millions of dollars on space that gets used one time a week.
Yes.
And we have been working with some forward-thinking churches on the idea of, hey, what would it look like to ask the community what they need and to facilitate a space around that, to where not only it brings people on site during the week, but there's even opportunities for revenue that comes out of that. And people who would otherwise never come on campus do. And it's not necessarily, hey, we're going to do a coffee shop. It's literally starting with the question of what does the community need and how do we work together to build a space that creates a relevance in the community.
Yes.
The passion behind that is that, when you look at when the church became a building, and I hate to say that, but when it was looked at as a building, was about 300 AD.
Yeah.
And if anyone's ever been over to Europe, you see that the church was not just in the center of community, it was
the center.
It was the center of community. It was literally built to be the meeting place for the community. I see us getting back to that place.
That's so cool. Yeah. And you and I have mutually worked with churches that are thinking that way and starting to really shift their mindset on that. And it's really remarkable, some of the ideas and the opportunities in that space. So talk a little bit about, we're seeing the innovation that's happening in restaurants, businesses, et cetera. What are you seeing in churches that are beginning to innovate? You've already touched on it a little bit, but what else are you seeing as churches begin to really think innovation?
Yeah, and this again, I look at things in a different lens. I'm a finance real estate guy that got into ministry, became a Christian at Buckhead Church, and so I'm not a church guy who's learned real estate, and so my brain operates a certain way. So forgive me for that in advance. But I call this the Amazon effect. And we are now seeing the Amazon effect kind of happen to churches. And what I mean by that is, I mentioned earlier that, you're seeing all these large retailers just like going out of business or filing Chapter 11. And Payless announced that, they were going to basically ask for a forbearance on all 1,300 locations around the country. I mean, you go down the list, every retailer is just getting destroyed.
Yeah.
Amazon stock is up 40%. And COVID didn't create that. COVID accelerated
it.
Yeah, there was something about the experience of trying something on, being out with your kids, grabbing a cup of coffee, going to Barnes and Nobles. And then there was something about that. And I know, as an example, I like to go grocery shopping. I like to pick out my own steaks. I like to pick out my own produce. But I'm getting really used to this idea of shit, right? The service that brings the groceries to your house. That's something I've never done. But what this is teaching us is a completely new consumer behavior. So, and you and I work with a lot of these churches, but we were all expecting the opposite of what's happened. Churches that were running 10,000 on a weekend are running 50 and 60,000.
Yeah.
And there's two factors to that. One is just the sheer accessibility of it, because we're meeting people where they are. Candidly, I would love to say that it's all the Holy Spirit, right? The Holy Spirit, and he's so present through this, like he really is. But the reality is that we're also in a season where our weekends are no longer competing with travel ball, volleyball, soccer, the beach, NFL Sunday, Saturday football, college football. But here's the thing, while that's true, I don't want to dismiss that, because we've also never had an opportunity to reach people because we have a captive audience like we do today. So what do we do with that? How do we leverage that?
Yeah, that's good.
So what's happening is the consumer behavior behind churches. Wow, I can access churches. And you know this because you've been through building projects. Like the two major factors when we create buildings is what is the proximity of the giving base or the attendee base, and how does that correspond to a room size?
Right.
Well, distance is no longer a factor. It's everything's, however far away I am from my computer, which is a couple feet. Room size is limitless. And what's happened is, those people that had city-based churches are becoming regional churches, and regional churches are becoming state churches or even U.S. regional churches.
Yep.
And the big question is always like, what does that do to corporate worship? And I don't want to confuse this. While it's an opportunity, I don't think that we'll replace high touch with high tech. In fact, I think the more high tech we get, the more high touch is required.
Agreed.
But we're in this beautiful place where we have the opportunity of reaching an audience we've never reached. And that's the Amazon effect.
Right.
So from a real estate perspective, I believe strongly that our build, going back to the relevance idea, I think our buildings are going to have to facilitate community on a weekly basis. Jenny, if you remember this, churches 10 years ago would say, hey, we're going to have everybody in homes. Right? Yeah. And most of those homes were in Alpharetta or wherever were 3,000 square feet. City churches are, going, how do you fit that many people in a house? What we're seeing now is like Sunday morning is going to be more of the play call. We're going to see shorter services, and it's going to be more of a call to action for things during the week, more service opportunities. Yep. The churches who are thriving right now are doing daily devotionals. They're doing closed Facebook groups with key stakeholders. They're innovating through how do we take high tech and turn it into a high touch mentality.
Yes.
And our buildings and our facilities are going to have to model that as well.
Yeah. One of the things that we've talked about this, I think, on other calls, but that I call it the curse of the crowd. We got really used to doing things to large crowds. We got kind of great at scale. And what I have seen us do in this season, and I think it's exactly what you're talking about on the other side of this, that high touch, that level of connection. And I've shared with you before that even where I find myself worshiping week after week is the places that offer the most options for service times, so back to the like kind of on-demand mentality, the churches that are offering multiple service offerings on a Sunday, where I can cater my schedule to what works well for me, which is kind of selfish, right? But I'm noticing that behavior in myself who, works with churches and helps churches think through strategy. And then the churches that I do feel seen and connected, I'm not just viewing things, that high touch nature of they see me, they're connecting with me, I can connect there. And so I think you're right. I think there's a hybrid of this that's really, really important that we're paying attention to as we move forward.
I agree. And to add on to that, and again, this is something we've said for a couple of years, and I just see COVID accelerating this. Jenny, when a new person, and by the way, like I said, I became a Christian at Buckhead Church, right? Like you talk about getting lost in the crowd. That was my goal.
Sure.
And actually it took me 3 services for me to realize that Andy was actually not live.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. One of the things that I've realized just from a human dynamics perspective is when you walk into a 3,500 seat room and you look at this beautiful $40 million facility, you feel like a product of the story. But when you walk into a 500 seat room and you recognize people and they recognize you, you feel like you're a part of the story. That's good.
Yeah.
And we have seen through the data that there are higher levels of giving, higher levels of service participation, higher levels of everything. It's an inverted economy of scale. The smaller the room gets, the more engagement you see.
That's huge. Yeah. Okay. So with what's going on in the market, I'm kind of shifting gears a little bit here on you, but with the status of the market, what should churches be prepared for? As we're thinking about all these different pieces that you're talking about, what do we need to be prepared for?
Yeah, and I don't know how everyone else feels on the call. I know that we've worked with a bunch of churches in Miami, DC, and Houston, and like we would create these multi-site models for them and trying to understand how to do a prototypical model within an urban context and how do we develop real estate in an urban context. And, we would go into CoStar, which is like the multiple listing service for commercial real estate, put in a search criteria and literally nothing would pop up. The real estate market in the past 4 years has just been crazy. And, I remember 2013 and 14, we were buying a bunch of Kmart's and Sears buildings and Costco's and Walmart's and converting them into church spaces. And like, those things just seem to like disappear.
Bought a Circuit City.
Circuit City. Yes, that's right. I remember. Yes, that's right. And that season like disappeared for a while. And just because the market got so hot and construction prices went up, when we got out of 2008, all those construction workers had nothing to do. And most of them got transplanted into new jobs. And so when the pinup demand hit in 14, 15, and we saw construction go crazy, we've been 300 to 400,000 jobs short in the construction industry for 4 years.
Wow.
It's one of the biggest reasons why, and the manufacturers and the suppliers and the subcontractors got efficient. And like, there was just so much demand and a limited supply and prices went. So we've been in a market where there's limited inventory, high construction prices, and it's just been hard.
Yeah.
However, like I said, what was going to happen over the next 2 to 3 years is likely going to happen over the next 2 to 3 months. And we are going to see a ton of those options popping up on the market again. 30 to 40,000 square foot, single tenant retail buildings, Bed Bath & Beyond, just all those types of buildings are going to pop up. We're also seeing, I used this as an example previously, but there's two larger contractors in Atlanta, and we had this kind of a decent sized job. I mean, it was a 20 something $1 million project we were working on. And 8 months ago, they basically said, hey, we're too busy to look at that right now, and we don't have the people to staff it, so we're going to pass. And it's funny, 8 months later, they're wanting to take me out to lunch, and they're wanting to go be buddies. And
right.
Both of them right now are interviewing on an $8 million job. So like what you're seeing is the contractors who had backlog between 2021 and 2022 are super hungry for work, and it's just going to drive construction prices down. So here's what I would say is two things are going on. If you're in the middle of design, I would say, yeah, it's good to be cognizant of the fact that whatever you thought you needed a year ago might be different based on how people are thinking differently about what they want from church.
Yep.
And I would challenge you not to ask what should people do, corporate worship, but what would people do? What will they do in response? Meeting people where they are versus trying to get them always to come to us.
Good.
The second thing is that right now I would challenge everybody on the call to budget for nothing. Everyone should have a decrease in expenses as it relates to being in this crisis. So put as much cash to the bottom line as you can right now, because if you're a growing church and you have more needs than you have resources, and you've been thinking through this for a while, the reality is that in a couple months, you're going to want to have the preparedness to meet the opportunities that will be presented to you.
Yeah.
And there's one other big factor that's happening is, and this is I want to approach this in an honoring way, but according to Jim Tomberlin and Warren Bird, who are friends of ours, and wrote the book on multi-site, wrote the book on mergers, put out a study that in 2019, 25% of the churches in America were somewhere between life support and the deathbed.
Right.
The churches who have done really well did well because they had a digital presence already. And what was a separate program we did has now become the main campus, at least during this season.
Yeah.
And the churches that were struggling did not have that. And it was about corporate worship. And I don't think the majority of those churches will remain in play. So Wall Street Journal put out an article at the beginning of the year that there's 60,000 vacant churches in America. We're about to see more of those opportunities hit the market. And instead of those buildings going to developers to turn them into apartments, I see the churches that are prepared to be able to actually honor the legacy of those pastors and the legacy of those ministries by partnering with them, using those buildings to continue something relevant in today's world. But church mergers are going to be, last year, 40% of campus multi-site growth was related to church mergers. Yeah. And coming into this season, we're going to see that number actually increase. And so my challenge to you is this, that I think building the strategy for the fall right now is critical. From a budgeting standpoint, from just a planning standpoint. How are we going to come out of this? And what are our buildings going to look like? How do we want to facilitate ministry? How are our buildings going to facilitate that ministry? And be prepared for the opportunities, because they will be there. And not to keep going. Sorry, Jenny. But
no, you're great.
I would say that the last thing, maybe one of the most important. So we talked about falling construction prices, and major availability on the market that we haven't seen in years of real estate. And real quick, and I'm sorry to digress, but when we think about retail spaces, single tenant retail spaces, what's great about those is they did all of our market research for us. Like they're there for a reason.
You're right. Right.
There's rooftops, they're on major thoroughfares, they're in ideal locations. So when we talk about relevance, we have large corporations who have gone and done market research for us on where we need to be in order to reach families, families, the people we minister to.
Yeah, that's a great
sorry for
point.
The digression, but yeah.
No, that's a great point. Yeah. They've done a lot of the research for us. You're exactly right. That's good.
Yeah, that's right. So you know that they're going to be in great locations. And so the last thing is this, and I know debt is somewhat of a divisive subject. So I'll say this. I don't think that any growing organization can actually avoid debt. We think of debt in terms of a mortgage. The reality is a mortgage is when you borrow money for a building. A lease is when you borrow a building for money. If you are a growing church and you decide that you want to pay all in cash and you have to wait 3 years, what you're doing is you're borrowing time in exchange for impact. So I think it's not a question of whether or not we're in debt. It's a question of how we go into it most intelligently. And usually when people think of bad debt, they think of irresponsible financial strategy, not debt itself.
Yeah.
But for those of you that are comfortable with that conversation and see debt as just an instrument versus a financial strategy, I would say this, what's happened in the bond market, which drives the interest rates, is the bond market has tanked. However, banks have not.
Right.
And they have modified loans, and they've kept their real estate investments afloat, and there's actually a low delinquency rate. And so bankers are coming out of a season where they were doing a bunch of loan modifications and then PPP loans. But you got a bunch of banks that still have a lot of good paper to lend. And because the bond market crashed, we're going to close this month. We'll close about $40 million worth of church projects. And all of those are in the low 3% rates. And the killer on that is it's not just the interest rate. Not to get into technical terms, but we have been in what's called a flat yield curve and even an inverted yield curve. And what that means is that your long-term debt is priced the same as your short-term debt. In fact, right now, your 1 month indices are more expensive than your 10-year fixed debt.
Wow.
I can borrow money at 10 years cheaper than I can borrow money at 1 month.
Wow.
That's never been the case. A couple of years ago, the difference was 3% between those two.
Wow.
So not only are we seeing the opportunity to go into a new season, but for anybody that has debt or is going into the fall, the capital markets have recovered much faster than the stock and bond market. So rates are still very low. Money's very cheap. And, and not to mention the fact that even if it's a minor savings on the interest expense, the ability of locking that in for 10 years is a huge deal. And we're seeing a lot of churches that are working with us that are taking advantage of those options right now.
That's good. Yeah. And so part of what I hear you saying is just like part of the clarity we're looking at is awareness of where the market conditions, awareness of, and really preparing ourselves for the opportunities that might be ahead because of some of the impact and the influence and growth we've experienced in digital right now, looking for how do we, once we start re-entering and reopening, the opportunities for us to continue to connect with people, but thinking about where will they connect with us, how will they connect with us, and then being aware of where the market is so we can be positioned to take advantage of that, so to speak. Is that a fair summary?
That's it. I would say, yes. I would say budget to the bottom line. Look at how low the cost of money is and your future opportunities. Cash is king. Keep as much cash as you possibly can. And be thinking through how this new consumer behavior can actually be a benefit to you in the new season. But Jenny, I think one of the largest line items in everyone's budget right now, if it's not facilities, is staffing and team culture. And man, that has obviously looking a lot different than it has in the past. So based on everything we just talked about, and markets changing and people's mentalities changing, most of the people on the call today are leaders or in leadership positions within their church. What are some of the things that leaders need to be thinking about right now?
Yeah. And of course that's my passion point, right? And I think everybody on the call is going to recognize in some ways we've been in triage. Well, not in some ways, we have been in triage mode, right? Like we have been reacting and responding to the urgent, demands that this situation has required of us. And the thing that I'm encouraging the leaders that I'm coaching, the exec teams that I'm working with, is it's time to get out of triage, to quit triaging the situation and start really getting some altitude and thinking out ahead. So kind of like you've been coaching us on the finance and the real estate side of things, we've also got to be thinking that way from a strategy and a staffing standpoint. We've got to get some altitude to go, okay, what has this situation changed? What has it not changed? And one of the things that I use a lot, I have something called, I call it the building blocks of organizational success, but it's this idea that there are some key things we need to do as leaders. And there's a sequential way we need to think about our organizational health. And so I want to share with you guys just a quick graphic to give you some perspective on this. Give me just a second to get this to share really quickly. But I want you to look at this graphic. If everybody can see this, you can kind of see that gold curve that's up and to the right, which is what we all aspire to, right? We all want to see growth that is up and to the right. And you can define growth however you do, whatever the impact of your ministry looks like, whatever those metrics are for ministry impact. But I really think there's three core things that we need to pay attention to as leaders, and it's purpose, it's culture, and it's strategy. So purpose is our why. Why are we doing what we do? Culture is our who are we doing it with, our team, our staff, etc. And strategy is our how. And in this current, these last few months, our strategy has been obliterated, right? Like all of the how we did ministry, how we did church has gotten completely upended. And the beauty is I have never seen church leaders react and pivot like I have in this season. And it is absolutely remarkable. So kudos to everybody for being able to react to our strategies being just blown up. But what is also happening, and I think most leaders I'm talking to are beginning to see this, that culture block in the middle is starting to get wobbly, right? Like our cultures, our staff cultures, are being eroded by all the extra pressure on them. Not just the pressure of all the pivoting that we've had to do from a strategy, but also from the pressure of remote work. And we didn't have good practices. We didn't have good communication and accountability systems for doing remote work. And so, we're all feeling the pressure of that. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But then there's this purpose piece. And the reason why I pause here, I'm going to come back to the culture one in a bit, because that's where a lot of our big questions are happening. But before we can even address culture, we've got to really look at this purpose piece, because, again, our how has been completely challenged and upended. But why we do what we do has not changed. And so one of the really key things that leaders need to do in this moment is go back to what's our purpose? What's our why? Mission has probably not changed. Our values as a church have probably not changed, but our vision, that target of, we want to do X by Y, that has probably changed to some degree, because again, our strategies are having to be reconsidered in this current climate. I'll stop share because now I'll have that visual in mind. But so the important thing for us as leaders is we've got to go back to and reset the target. And this is the big thing that I'm hearing from a lot of leaders is, and this is where some of that is a bit uncertain, because we don't completely know timelines and we don't know exactly how people will re-engage. But what you do know is your why. You know that mission of who you are as a church and what it looks like to lead people to faith. Like, why you're doing what you're doing has not changed. So then you've got to go back to that and reset the target of, okay, this is how we're doing it. And what I'm seeing is that our staff teams are starting to get a little unsettled, a little squirrely, because we triaged the moment, but we're having difficulty clarifying now what's coming up. And a part of what we're recognizing is that in some ways, because everything is shifting and changing so much, we're having to set that target maybe 30 days at a time or 90 days at a time. So we're not setting even 1-year visions or 5-year visions and strategic plans. We're setting them in shorter increments because there are so many things shifting, but we do still have to set a target so that our teams understand where we're going and why we're going there, or they're going to start getting fatigued, which speaks to that culture block where the team energy, commitment, engagement is starting to wane, because they could react to the immediate changes. But now if we're not giving them a target of what to be looking towards and what to be looking for in the future, even again, if it's only 30, 60, 90 days, as leaders, we've got to be setting that target so that we can help our teams know where we're going and why we're going there. So that's a big thing. The other thing that I would say to that is, your team's been under a lot of pressure. So there's a lot of pressure on the team that you need to be aware of as leaders in this season. And before I get there, I want to share one more thing. Sorry, you're smiling at me because you.
No, you're great.
I want to share one more thing with y'all. There we go. If most of you are probably familiar with the stages of growth in every organization, and I use the predictable success model. I'm certified in the predictable success model, but we talk about these 7 stages of growth, and we don't have time to go into it, but basically there's an early struggle, there's fun, there's whitewater, there's the predictable success where we all want to live, which is at the top of the bell curve. We found that sustainable, healthy growth as an organization. We don't want to drift over into treadmill or the big rut into decline. We want to stay in this healthy growth place as an organization. Well, one of the things we have to do in this moment that leaders need to do is we need to have some organizational self-awareness of where were we pre-COVID? Like what stage of growth or decline were we in, and be honest about that, and be, because again, I've worked with some organizations that were over here and some churches that were over here on the decline side. And if we're not honest and have good, what I call organizational self-awareness about where we are, if you can envision, these blue arrows are kind of the headwinds of crisis, the headwinds of COVID, so to speak, are now pushing on your organization and creating pressure that is, and you all feel it. We feel the pressure, and we're feeling the need to respond and resist that force so we can stay relevant, still accomplishing ministry, etc. But what happens here is that headwind of crisis is going to push you further down, either whatever side you were on. So if you were in a decline stage already, if you were starting to get into maybe a plateaued or a declining stage as a church, the headwind of this crisis is going to push you even further into decline unless you are aware of it and know how to resist and push back against it, right? If you were over here in some of the stages of growth, it also is pushing you back to some of the early stages where you're having to re-engage when you talked about the just that connection side of things, that human connection is so critical. That's what's happening for our organizations that are over here, is that they're re-engaging some of those things they did in the early stage of growth to build connection, to help create community so that people didn't get lost in the crowd. And so the point I'm making with this is that you need to understand where you were pre-COVID, if you were in a growth stage or you were in a decline stage, and then understand the pressure that a crisis is creating. You feel it intrinsically, but I hope the visual is kind of giving you some perspective to say, oh, and I have to be intentional, and especially over here, we've got to be intentional to innovate and really change that trajectory, or it's going to lead to further decline as an organization. And that's kind of, Nathan, what you alluded to when you're talking about even some of the churches that are in decline and how the potential for more mergers and things. That's essentially what's happening, is those churches that were in deep decline, the crisis is going to push them even further into decline, and therefore, and create places where there may be more opportunities for mergers, et cetera. But what I want to showcase there is that we need to have that organizational self-awareness so we can analyze where we are, what the impact of this has been, and then what will it take for us to re-engage a growth strategy. And again, that growth strategy might look different. We may have to reset those metrics. That goes back to paying attention to how engagement is changing, and reset the metric. And it might not be all about Sunday morning attendance. We're recognizing that there are a lot of different ways that people are engaging with our churches. And we've got to be honest about that as leaders and help reset those targets so our team are positioned to succeed.
I love that. And honestly, I'm even thinking, Jenny, about our company. It's like, man, it's so easy to confuse why we do something with how we do it and put those two things together.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
And it's cool to hear a leader come and say, like, hey, if you change how you do something, it doesn't make you less of who you are or why you're doing it. It's just, it feels like a permission to innovate. Like, it's really great.
Yeah. Well, it's just going back to, okay, what's that foundation? And that foundation is set in our purpose. And then we reconstruct things from there. But you're exactly right. It's that we confuse our how with our why. And that's one of the biggest things I think leaders need to look closely at right now.
That's so good. Well, let me ask you this, because I know, all of a sudden you talk about everything kind of being amplified. I mean, one of the things that's amplified are organizational charts and people's roles, and like, what is this crisis and this transition doing to, what are you seeing it do right now to team culture?
Yeah. And that's a big one. So in that first graphic I showed you, it's the culture block is right smack in the middle. And it is key to connecting purpose to strategy, right? Like that culture piece of what is happening with our team is so critical for us to accelerate out of this. But what's happening is our cultures are being a bit eroded because of all, like I said earlier, all those additional pressure on our teams because of the changes that have been just, immediate. We've had to move really fast. Most of our teams, even our most agile teams, have been stretched in this. And most of our church staff teams are not super agile, especially the larger your church is, the more challenging it is for you to be agile and move quickly and make those adjustments. But you have, which is amazing. But it has put undue pressure and stress on your team, coupled with the demands of remote work and having to do everything via video screens or Slack or whatever tools your team uses. One of the things that I notice is that our communication as a team has gotten more transactional, because if you or I need to work on the webinar, well, we schedule a meeting, we schedule a Zoom call, maybe we text one another, but we don't have that. If we were working in the same office together, we would, oh, hey, can we get 5 minutes and talk about, we have to make a decision about XYZ, or, hey, we had an amazing weekend, went kayaking, and, just the chit chat and the relational nature of cultures and teams is harder to reproduce virtually. And it's not impossible, but we have lost the things that were very natural in our engagement with one another. So you just have to recognize that there's been a lot of extra pressure on your team that is eroding the trust, the communication, and just the sense of belonging that should happen in a healthy team. Also, what's happening is your strong team members are shining brighter than ever, and your weaker team members are standing out even more. So the good and the bad of our teams is showing up. And that happens to all of us. Under pressure, our best and our worst are very obvious. And that also happens collectively for our teams, that you are seeing the healthiest parts of your team, and you're also seeing the weakest parts of your team. And you need to use that as data points, because it's like we talked about earlier. COVID hasn't really changed anything. It's just amplified and accelerated what was already there. And when we're talking about our staff and our teams, it has amplified for you probably some decisions that you needed to make about your team that you didn't want to make before this. And this crisis is creating some clarity around who is really fitting the culture, who is living the values, who is on board with the mission, who has the capacity to be flexible and respond and react and contribute in the way you need them to contribute. And now it's the courage to make perhaps some necessary changes. Because the other thing that's going on is we do probably have some decisions to make about staffing and so forth on the other side of this. And I might be getting a little ahead of myself, but yes, our team cultures have been under an exorbitant amount of pressure. And as leaders, we've got to be paying attention to that now in order to help lead through it and make sure we've got a healthy team standing with us on the other side of this.
That's so good. Okay.
Sorry, that also sounds a little harsh, but.
No, it does. And I mean, that's where a lot of people's questions are about reassigning of roles and allocations of budgets. And, everyone's wondering, I don't think anyone's on board with, laying a bunch of people off right now, but everyone is wondering, like, hey, we are seeing what we thought we already knew happening. So what do we do with that? So I guess the question would be to you is like, Ginny, what do you see teams looking like kind of in general coming, not just in this epidemic, but as we come out of it, like, what does that look like?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is our teams are going to have to be stronger yet leaner. And there's a couple of reasons for this. I mean, the beauty is that I know a number of churches who have not had financial impact by this yet, and hopefully not at all, which is beautiful. Some churches have had giving impacted by this. So, and we don't know what the long tail is of that yet. But what I do know is that either way, our teams need to be stronger and leaner, because people's confidence in giving to our organizations is going to be based on their belief that we are being as wise and as smart with our resources as we can be. And so wherever we can demonstrate that we are being very intentional to have our teams be strong but lean, they're going to feel better about that, because everybody is going to be making financial decisions personally in their professions to be wiser with their resources. We're not going to have a lot of room for fluff, in my opinion, for a while, right? Because we're all going to be rebuilding, and that's going to have varying impact depending on your circumstances. But the people who are giving to our ministries need to be confident that we are being as wise as we possibly can with all the resources that we have. Now, with that said, I'm not a believer in a ton of cutting of staff if you can avoid it. So, I mean, I'm a believer in trying to keep your teams and employ your staff as much as you can. But what comes with that is we've got to be very clear about their responsibilities. And then this is the big thing that I would say, is that every organization, every church needs to be reevaluating your structure on the other side of this, because some of our strategies have changed and shifted. So there are some places that you discovered through COVID that you had to redirect some staff energy to help with digital and to help with engagement and things with, because we're not in the physical church building. Well, what happens as you essentially do both? How do you need to align your team to help accomplish this strategy? And again, that strategy has been shifted. So I think everybody needs to reconsider their organizational structure to make sure you have built a structure that best supports your strategy. And every role needs to be reevaluated. Digital is going to need more emphasis. Connection and engagement roles are going to need to be prioritized. And so I think it's in everybody's best interest to rethink their structure based upon what the new strategy that you've identified, or the adjusted strategy at a minimum. And then another thing is remote work is here to stay. And I know churches don't traditionally love to create remote work opportunities, but I think we have to. I think people have gotten, they have recognized that it is possible to do more remote work, and they're going to have higher expectation of that. There may be some people who are so happy to come back into the office because working at home with their kids at home was, crazy making. But by and large, people are going to, I was talking to a leader the other day that, they've been working from home for the last couple months. And as they re-enter, she's in a culture where it's very strict work in the office. And she's reconsidering if she'll go back, if they will not allow some remote work. Not that she has to work exclusively from home, but there's going to be an expectation of more remote work. But with that, we have to get better at communication. We have to get better at accountability. We're not traditionally very good at that as leaders. And so we've got to get better at knowing how to manage and lead our teams to enable, to make sure that we're creating cultures where they're working effectively, they're contributing well, but being stronger and leaner is going to be key to that. So those are a few things top of mind.
Oh, it's so good. I love it. And honestly, it pairs so much, Jenny, with what we were talking about earlier too, just getting leaner and meaner with facilities, and instead of everyone having 500 feet to themselves, getting in. Offices are not an area that we need to spend millions of dollars on, and so the market's already doing that. Why are we not as churches? So I love it. Before we get into Q&A, like if we had to kind of take everything that we're talking about right now and just some actionable next steps or ideas that people need to be thinking through, what would you say right now is just needed from organizations and leaders going into the season?
Yeah, it's, we have to be better as leaders in that our communication, the accountability, like I talked about, we've got to create cultures where where we are empowering people more than ever. So the flexibility, the resilience, the innovation, we have to create cultures where we can release team members to do that. But in order to release team members to do that, we've got to communicate well. We've got to create a culture of accountability. We have to and create high trust environments. And so there's a lot of just awareness and assessment we need to do of our current team dynamics. So that often starts with a look at values, because we need to lead through values rather than policies or details, which is where a lot of us default. We tend to be, as leaders, we tend to be either really high control, micromanager. We would never like to admit this, but we like to have high control and we like to dictate all the details. Or we are completely hands off and we kind of abdicate leadership responsibility in hopes that everything will figure itself out. We do not have the luxury of either of those extremes. They're not healthy anyway. We've got to figure out, how do I create cultures where We are leading people by values that help, that establish guiding principles that give people the guardrails to make decisions so that they can be flexible, resilient, and innovative in the work that they're doing. And so defining those values and getting really clear about what that means and what that looks like. And then, and we've got some resources and tools that we can send after the fact that kind of help you start to define that. And then looking at your org chart, defining the values that are going to guide your team forward, and then looking at your org chart and structuring it for the strategy, the new strategy you've defined are two really key things.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Well, Jenny, that was amazing. Obviously too, even though we do these webinars together, every time you talk, I'm like secretly writing notes over here of things that I want to incorporate with my team.
And I'm taking notes of financial terms that you throw out that I'm like, I need to go Google that after the fact.
Well, I just appreciate it. I guess one question I do get asked even after these webinars, do you do any sort of diagnostic work, or do you do anything with churches that help them evaluate that culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we do. We have a free diagnostic thing that, you can reach out just even via email, which we'll give everybody email and links afterwards. But, we'll take a quick assessment of what's going on with your team. What do we see in your org structure? We can look at the leadership styles, especially of your executive team. So your top tier of leaders, whatever you call that. We can do just a quick free assessment that gives you a sense of how to structure your team to help you move forward through this season. So we have that for sure that we'd love to do for folks.
I love it. So Jan, Randy, make sure you sign us up for that. That'd be great. It's time to transition into questions and answer. I know that we have a few. So Randy, if you're on, do you want to walk us through? Actually, I see this here. So one of the first questions was, we launched a capital campaign. Obviously had to put it on pause. And first of all, I want to agree with that strategy. It's hard to say the church is not a building during the season while you're raising money for a building. So I think that's, right. I do think about relaunching. I think there's actually a gentleman that's on the call today that I'm going to totally call him out, but it's one of the more brilliant strategies I've heard. It's Glenn Breckner, who's the XP at Chase Oaks in Dallas. But they came up with the phrase "here for good." It's always stuck with me because it really means two things. It means, hey, we are here to stay, but it also means that we're here to do good. And it's a very flexible type of idea that's able to carry out. Hope City in Houston, it's, what do I say? Making hope possible. So two things. One, that's obviously the ability of being able to make Hope City permanent in a new facility, but also too, as we're in COVID, the ability of adapting language to say, hey, we're bringing hope to a city that's devastated by this awful pandemic and this disease. So I don't know about relaunching. I think, again, I would reevaluate. You made a comment that everything's going to the bottom line. My advice to you is to focus more on top line, organic, systematic generosity than episodic giving. There's a larger audience than you'll ever reach. I would say engage people at the lowest barrier of entry possible, and then cultivate and celebrate those relationships. That would be my advice to how to kind of pursue this next season of financial growth.
That's good. Do you want to speak, Nathan, to the next question is, do you foresee a shift in traditional budget allocation for staff, facility, et cetera?
Yes.
I knew you'd have an opinion about that one.
Yes. So listen to me, and I think you and I will be on the same page on this. You talked about lean and mean, and again, COVID has accelerated something that was working for people already. So last year, we had 18 clients that were on the fastest growing churches in America list, and we were asked to put together kind of a survey response idea to that. Like, what is it? What are the common characteristics with these 18 churches that all made it to the fastest growing churches in America list? And there was a few things. One, all of these churches had more than 25% of their attendance in kids, which means there's a direct correlation between how you serve families and how you sustain growth in your church. 17 of the 18 churches were multi-site. There's a whole list, but the one that stood out to me was, and this is shocking, but every single one of those churches had 35% or less in staffing costs, wages, salaries, and benefits.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of fortunate. I sit on the stewardship board or in this fractional kind of CFO position for like 15 churches. And so I get to see all this stuff, and it's fun. Yeah. But it has been remarkable to see the churches that are effective. Every time you hire someone, you designate them to a position that volunteers could have filled, And, you know, the only time you should hire someone in this new season, in my opinion, is if they're a developer of talent, not talent.
Yes. I would put a huge amen on that. One of the things I didn't talk about earlier, but is really key, is that I do think we're going to see fewer, again, our teams have got to be strong and lean. And there'll probably be more contract work that you bring in for smaller projects or very specific needs. But one of the things that was core when I was working as executive pastor at both of the churches that I served at, is that somebody could not be hired to our staff who was not a developer of people. That was a pay to play. Like you could not be in a paid staff position if you had not already demonstrated the ability to recruit, develop, and deploy volunteers. Because and again, I think this becomes even hypercritical in this next era for us as leaders. And we fell into that. Our budgeting percentage, for staff was quite lean. It was under 40%. And we could do that because we were valuing their ability to help engage volunteers, that was core to a hiring decision. And if we needed very specific skill, then that might be something we contracted as an on-needed basis versus it being part of our staffing dollars. So that's really huge.
Yeah, so good.
Can you speak to, one of the questions is examples of redesigning building for new reality instead of building new facilities?
Yeah, I think everyone's in that phase. I mean, we always make the joke, the cheapest way to get more seats is to use the same seats more. But the cheapest way to get a new building is to look at how when the building you were in was designed, it was in a different time, in a different place, in a different season, sometimes under a different leader.
Yep.
We do a lot of that. Like one of the guys that's on our team that, we do hire outside architects, but he's on the team as kind of director of development. And so what he does is he goes in and creates the program that we usually give to a local architect who doesn't have to know church, but that's a whole other thing. But that's one of the first things we start with. Everybody's looking for new space, but hey, why don't we look at what you have and put that completely on the table and say, hey, let's not let our opportunities define our strategy. Let's create a strategy and define our opportunities. Do we need to just redesign this? Do we expand this? Do we go multi-site? Do we change how we do offices? But you have full permission in this season to put everything on the table and rethink it. And the cheapest way to do that is to look at the resources you already have.
That's good. And Nathan, I didn't ask you this earlier, but you guys do a free analysis for churches as well. Can you speak to that? Let everybody know how you guys.
Yeah, our thing since the beginning, when I became a Christian, I really wanted to, I left a good job to do this. And my passion has always been, I want to invest in relationships before we ask for a commitment. And so that was kind of the thing we led with since the beginning. But yeah, we've got a team. One of the guys in our team is a former chief credit officer at Wells Fargo. We've got an architect who's designed some of the biggest and best, church facilities in the country. But our thing is this: we know that we can't help everyone, but especially in this season, we really want to be a resource for as many people as we can. And so, we work with a lot of churches and just basically getting the financial information, giving data, building plans, building budgets, taking a look at that and saying, hey, just an opportunity to kind of dive into what you're doing. And if we can help you, great. If not, at least hope that you walk away with a couple points of things that could help you. But that's our way of investing in churches is just to provide that free analysis. Look at, if you could save money on a refi, if it's possible to refinance. Everything from facilities to finances. We're happy to dive into for free.
That's so good. Yeah. And so helpful. I'm going to share really quickly screen again that just has our contact information for anybody that wants to reach out to either of our teams. Our email addresses are there. And any way that we can serve or support you guys, we are grateful and we're honored to do that. I'm going to exit this so that we can wrap up. And we'll have all of this in the follow-up email along with a link for you guys, so that if you want to listen back through it. I saw somebody say their hand was hurting from taking so many notes, but listen back through it, maybe share it with somebody else. We hope that this was helpful. Again, we're all kind of learning and leading through this season together, because while we can look historically at a few things in the past, this is still a whole different scenario for all of us. And so we want to continue to learn and grow, and where we can be a resource and a help, that's really our heart. at both Ministry Solutions and at Foresight. And so we're really grateful that y'all spent the day with us, or this
Yeah,
hour
sure.
with us, not a whole day, an hour. But we're super grateful you spent the time with us. Nathan, anything else from your side before we wrap?
Same thing. Thank you. I thank you for all the guys that you guys are doing just for the kingdom right now. We've seen the church just be more relevant through this season than maybe ever. And it's just great to see the openness and the heart behind everything you're doing. So we just thank you, and thank you for letting us be a part of your day today. It really means a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you all. And hopefully we'll see you on another one of these soon.
All right. Thanks, guys.